This is Dave Lundahl. I'm here to welcome everybody who is currently participating in this version of WebinarsNow, accelerating innovation through Agile Techniques. And this is part 2 of a series of webinars we've been giving. And this is focused today on translation through iterative design. So welcome, everybody. Really excited to have you here. I'm going to get right into it, and we'll move from there. I'd like to do as a way of introduction, introduce both myself and then Karen Lynch. My name's Dave Lundahl. I've been working in innovation for the past 25 years. I was one of the founders of InsightsNow back in 2003. I've published a book on innovation back in 2011, Breakthrough Food Product Innovation Through Emotions Research. And I'm really excited about this topic on Agile Techniques. So Karen, can you do an introduction yourself?
Happy to. Thank you so much. So I'm Karen Lynch. I'm the Senior Director of Qualitative Insights here at InsightsNow. I joined our team last May after also about 25 years as a qualitative specialist. I'm happy to be here co-presenting with Dave. This is a real passion area of mine. And without further ado, I say we just roll.
Yeah, let's do it. So anyways, for those of you that are unfamiliar with InsightsNow, let me just do a little bit of introduction about InsightsNow. We're a behavioral market research company. We provide insights really to support these 3 areas: marketing, messaging, brand positioning planning, and innovation and product development. Today's discussion will be more about the innovation and product development side. What we mean by behavioral is is that we look at our research participants as human beings, to understand and gain insights from them into questions of why they act like they do. And we found this approach really helps everyone understand not only why products, are going to succeed or not succeed, but it also improves speed to and success in market, which really is what is very important, especially in the innovation process. This approach has led, us at InsightsNow to be recognized in the Grit 50, which is a list of the most innovative firms in the world. We're happy to share what we learn through these webinars, and so that's kind of a form of introduction who we are. A little bit of housekeeping here before we start. If you have questions at any point during this webinar, there will be a side panel here, and it says questions, and you can click on that, and you can provide type in your questions. You can send them to us privately, and then we'll follow up with you after the webinar, or you can send to all. It means people will be able to see, not necessarily who you are, but be able to see your question. And then we will talk about that later on. We'll talk about it after our webinar as part of the question and answer period. So that's a sort of housekeeping. So let's get into the content today. So review a bit. Agile methods is comprised of iterative learning sprints rather than lengthy stages and gates. This new approach has been shown to foster this sort of startup thinking that is been shown to be more entrepreneurial. It is seeking to more rapidly advance the best ideas that come forward, or to fail faster if you align, so that you can better, I should say, align the risk with increased confidence in increasing, costs as you go from early stage sprints to later stage sprints, and taking products from an idea stage all the way to commercialization. This sort of agile approach is gaining, massive traction throughout industries for fast-moving consumer goods companies. This agile approach is proving to increase market responsiveness and is increasing not only speed to market, but also increasing success rates. So it's proving to be an area that is an approach. So last month, we talked about the early stage areas of sprints. We're trying to really co-create, understand opportunities. All these learning sprints go through this sort of process of discover, design, develop, test cycles. And today we're going to focus on what we call translation sprints. And these are areas where we're taking a concept that's been developed and design into it features and functionalities and sensory cues that signal what the brand is promising, what you're promising through your product concept. So both in terms of the design of packaging and also the contents of packaging. Now, next month, we're going to be extending this. We originally said we're going to do this as a two-part, but we realized we have so much great content to share. We're going to add a third webinar, which will be next month, and it'll be on May the 3rd at the same time. And we'll be talking about commercialization sprints, which is taking your design and taking that further to market. More on that later on. So let's get into this. So how do we achieve success through this sort of agile approaches to innovation? So this idea of translating through design is about really creating a bridge to consumers. And we've found that behavioral techniques is the lens that is so important to use when you're translating. And we just got a new puppy just this past week, so I'm all thinking about dogs. So I put in this picture here today. But the idea is, you need a behavioral sort of lens to really effectively translate. Now, as kind of an introduction of the content for today, I want to go through some key concepts. One is called priming. One is called spark the senses, which is a technique that we apply. Another one is called implicit associating. And this is all going to be wrapped up into sort of a learning sprint sort of approach called co-design. So priming. What is priming? Now, this is a case study that we did some years ago. I'll show you some data here in a second from that we did for the Almond Board of California. But if you think about almonds, what comes to mind when you see this picture? You might see the little pieces of salt that are on here, and those sort of impressions of this almond, might create different associations for different people. Your associations might be positive because you like the flavor and taste of almonds as you're eating almonds from a bag or whatever. Or perhaps it may signal something, a consequence where you're trying to reduce salt. So you may perceive this as like, this is avoid because of the salt, or it may be something that you really gravitate. But the point is that priming is really bringing into the context, because in different contexts, at different points in your life, you may have very different sort of associations with almond. And to show you what I mean by this is some research that we did where we looked at various different moments for eating breakfast. And we asked people what were the associations with almonds in the context of different breakfast moments. So when people were at home having a breakfast moment, we found that the primary association, 34%, was with high protein. So when they saw almonds, thought of almonds, they associated with high protein. A smaller percentage of people was about the flavor. They liked the flavor of almonds. When people were on the go eating breakfast, out of the home, on the go, it was reversed. 46% of the people associated with almonds with my favorite flavor, while only 24% associated with high protein, which is really interesting. So context really matters. So what is important here is that when you are translating, if you want to have an accurate translate for the design of products, participants must be primed or mentally placed into relevant moments. And so Karen is going to go through some techniques and talk a little bit about this later on in some case studies, how we prime people up front for all the research we do when translating. Now, the next sort of area technique that is important here is called priming. Sparking the senses. And what we do is we prime when people are primed into a relevant moment, when they're going to use the product or the type of category that you're using. What you want to do is by priming, you bring sensory memories to the surface. And what is important about bringing these sensory memories to the surface, it allows you to create associations. So sparking the senses is about what we do is once people have been primed and those sensory memories are close to the surface where they can be accessed cognitively, we then provide concepts or key constructs that are important, and we find what are the associations of sensory cues to those benefits or key concept constructs. Really important technique, especially when you're at the front end of a translation process where you're trying to translate the concept or constructs into sensory qualities to design those qualities into your products. So think about the construct of energizing. So what we have developed is a Spark Kit, as we call it. And this Spark Kit goes through the various sensory modalities one by one, or any that are relevant to the product space. And we say, okay, pick things that are or are not energizing. So sight, we have card sorts that cover a full range of the spectrum of different sort of things that people can use to stimulate, and say, pick something that is energizing to you and something is not, and then tell us why. And what this does is bring to the surface metaphors, it brings to it past experiences, it brings people tap into their sensory sort of qualities. So we do the same thing for smell. We have kits for smell, but a lot of associations can be made for smell, for touch. We have different fabrics that can be used. We get taste and flavor, various different sets that we provide. And we also do acoustics, or various short sounds that people hear and can pick through the things that are or are not associated with the construct of importance. So these Spark Kits really elicit memories. They elicit, people will talk about how they feel and why, they pick one thing and that is or is not associated with the construct, and so on. So it really helps in design sensory cues. So this is what we mean sparking the senses. Now, a different approach, another technique, is called implicit associating. And I've got a quick example here on fabric softeners. This is some research that we did a number of years ago, but it still stands as a really cool. So implicit association goes the other way. So you still prime people in the moment, so their sensory memories can be cognitively accessed, and then we provide product or prototypes to stimulate, and we go the other way, and we discover what are the benefits or constructs or consequences, things positive or negatively, that are associated with the sensory experiences. So this is really good in prototyping and understanding whether you are actually creating benefits that are fitting with the construct you're going after. So just really briefly, we did some work back on fabric softeners. We found that the key, like downy, lavender, and vanilla, which was a key sort of sensory quality, descriptive panel said is lavender, herbal, creamy, sandalwood, vanilla, but consumers could not characterize what it was. And so it was very difficult to describe it from a consumer's. Consumers probably didn't have the language. It just smelled like it smelled. It just had this aroma that was characteristic. But they could very quickly characterize in terms of the imagery it provided. They could very quickly talk about then the sorts of memories that it could be associated with. And they could very quickly and easily talk about how it made them feel in terms of emotional constructs. So it's really interesting. So this sort of process is really important. So this is all woven together into a process of co-design, okay, which is a rapid iterative learning sprint. Karen's going to go through some examples, but let me kind of set the stage here. So these rapid iterative learning sprints go through a discovery phase, development, and test phase, okay, cycles. And the early stage where spark the senses comes into play is you take these constructs and you build a knowledge base of cues that are associated with the key constructs, okay? That's where that falls. Then this becomes an input for designers like creative chefs or your packaging designers teams or even your marketers to design into marketing materials, into packaging or product for prototyping or creating mock-ups. And these prototypes or mock-ups then, we apply then, you go the other way with implicit associating so that you can do design validation to determine do they really achieve the constructs you're trying to achieve. So this sort of process then, what we do is have a co-design is a rapid iterative. We start with Spark, especially if you don't have any if it's a new area of research you're doing, and then you do this rapid iterating prototyping. So that's sort of what we're talking about. Karen is now going to talk through some case studies of how this was really applied. So I'm going to give Karen here the
the control.
She has the control. She's becomes controller. She is now the presenter.
I am.
So take it away. Take it away.
Yeah, let me just get you on the proper screen. I believe I took control. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Is it there, Dave?
Yes, it is.
It is. All right, then.
I believe.
So hi. So let's pop into these case studies. Click on it. It's working. Okay. So one of the things that we need to just stay aligned with for the rest of this presentation, if you will, is that this coming out of the research on the fuzzy front end, whatever we did to get where we are when we have concepts, we need to translate those to ensure that our messaging and our product and our concept are all aligned. So we need to make sure that the promise of that concept, I don't know if any of you have ever been in research where the consumers just can't make sense of any kind of a concept that you show, there's no product concept fit. So the idea that we want to make sure that what the concept says the product will do fits with what the product actually does. And the way we do that is through this rapid iterative learning, right? We want to build in those sensory cues into our packaging and our messaging to make it a holistically matched product, if you will, making it relevant, making it easier for them to try. So the first case study I want to bring you into here is in the category of energy bars. So energy bars, right? We talked a little bit about some of the examples Dave was sharing earlier, but in this one, it's the idea we took a look using our product sparse methodology, and I don't need to go into too many details here because Dave already ran through it, but understanding it's a three-step process. We look at these moments, we do a deep dive based on homework that we've given to participants, priming homework, if you will, where they come in and they're able to access those kind of memories a little bit more readily. So we do this moment deep dive by reviewing their homeworks. Then we go on this cue discovery where we're looking at the different sensory tools we have, if you will, from Visual Explorer cards and textural samples and sense samples, etc., to find out what some of the languages. We really mine those conversations for sensory language. Those are what we end up translating into cues. The sensory mining is where we bring in some of those associations, where we take a look at what we've heard and the team works collaboratively on a common language base, if you will, for design. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But let me tell you how this particular energy project flowed. Basically, we brought consumers together. We focused on energy as the benefit, and when we get to it, actually, we'll tell you that the homework primes them in a busy, energizing moment. So I'll give you an example of that momentarily. And again, as I said, the Product Spark process brings us through 3 steps. This moment deep dive where we're reviewing that homework, in some face-to-face research, some cue discovery through these metaphorical activities, and then mining with some test products and prototypes that really gave us this grid of language. The concept that we shared with everybody, if you can take a look here, is again that morning energy concept. So this is not a fully fleshed out concept. We're just giving people an idea. It's more of a construct, if you will, rather than a concept that would go into concept testing. So we use those terms specifically here. What we're talking about is something in the morning that is sustaining energy for their morning, something you eat for breakfast and it keeps you going for lunch. So again, that's the concept. People were to bring in stories. And the opportunity there is that we start to understand, we kind of have a little empathy for the men and women with their hurried lifestyles, their multitasking for their breakfast. They don't really have a traditional meal. They're eating energizing foods and beverages, and they're selecting products that fit into their schedule to keep their energy up, to curb their appetite, to tide them over, et cetera, et cetera. So in the groups when we come in, this is an example of the type of story we might get with our priming homework. So again, this is a woman named Lynn. It's a busy, energizing moment that she's captured in story. I'm going to let you all read this, but I'm going to highlight just a few keywords as I go through it also, just so that we stay kind of together in your reading. This woman's a late sleeper, had an early morning client meeting. She's always in a time crunch in the morning. She doesn't want to get up early for breakfast. She counts the minutes, knowing everything she needs to do. She grabs a coffee, puts it in a travel mug, grabs an apple, sticks it in a baggie. 5.5 minutes total in her kitchen. So she keeps a box of bars in her car. They're better than a big-ass bagel slathered with butter, which are empty carbs. Her granola bar is sweet and crunchy, has a creamy ribbon of peanut butter. She can feel and taste it. It's kind of fun with the whole grains. It's crunchy. So she's having this great sensorial experience with the product that she chose, but we're also in the moment with her. We're in her car, seeing her travel mug in the cup holder, the bag of apples on the passenger seat, the granola bar that's in her lap. So it's, for her, satisfying and acceptable, and she made it to her meeting on time, which was her priority. That's the type of story that primes people in that moment. They can access sensorial cues more readily at that point. An example of one of the spark elements, which is a textural metaphor exercise. People, again, with visuals, that's a little bit easier for people. They can find a visual that connects. Again, it's a bit of a forced connection, but they're able to make it. Texturally, this is a fabric that was an example of a busy, energizing fabric. So this one that they chose, the participants said, it's rough, it's bumpy, it's earthy, kind of complicated. When I think of a food that's energizing, it's not simple, it's not refined, it's rough, and will definitely not white. Notice she used rough here twice in her verbatim. The idea is that these are sensorial cues that we want to fold into the product development process because we're understanding them on a different level here. She is subconsciously telling us that rough is actually something fairly important through this exercise. That's how we discover cues. For the cue mining phase, like I said, this is when the team collaborates together to come up with this language and this framework using all of the different sensorial elements, if you will, to build the proper prototype. So we certainly want something that resonates with the participants, with the consumers out there, with your target market, resonates with the intended moment of consumption. But we want to make sure that we're also being able to pull on cues that differentiate products, right? What are other brands not doing? Is rough really being captured out there, for instance, or is rough something that we can own down the road? So those are some of the things that the R&D team focuses on when we wrap up a project like this. So we make sure that the research aligns kind of cues to the desired benefits. It's also differentiating. And you know, what happens is we get actually a really fantastic result, outcome. Some of the exercise, and I'm going to give you a visual example in a moment. Some of the exercises we do in conjunction with Spark the Senses is, you know, we come up with these customer continuums, or I'm sorry, you know, kind of product continuums, if we will, where we're looking to understand what products that are out there anymore can we force connections to that show examples of thin and smooth on the continuum to rough and heavy, for instance. So a slim, fast product is super thin to super smooth, not necessarily what we want in rough, right? So we have to make sure, what level of roughness are we talking about? What's appealing in a busy, energizing bar for the morning? Is it all the way over here at heavy, where Cliff Bars are, or is it somewhere further along? So we play with that. We could do the same thing for the protein taste. Obviously, an energy drink doesn't necessarily have a high protein taste, but a Chobani yogurt really does, right? So where is a morning feel for what the protein taste should be like? So we play with these continuums, if we will, where we're trying to go beyond just what people like, but into something that's a little more sensorially directive. Another exercise we do with our kind of product Spark projects, most of you have probably seen a benefit ladder like this before, where we say maybe they taste a product and they tell us what the benefits of a product are, and we ladder up those benefits a little higher and we get to some emotional higher end benefit. That's a pretty traditional activity in many, many focus groups, if you will. One of the things we're focused on is not just reasons to believe. So why would we believe something gets filled up? Well, you tell me it's in the concept, it's high protein, right? Or it's dense. So of course its density and its high protein level will get us filled up, which gets me to energized and great satisfaction too. But in our Spark the Senses types of methods, what we do is we're trying to find the visual cues which signal those reasons to believe that lead up to those higher end benefits. So visually, what tells us that it's high protein? Well, it's the combination of almonds and fruit. It's the dullness, not the shininess, or the complexity, that roughness. Here it's coming up again, right, in this chart. So all of those things together with some textural cues of chewiness and heaviness, that's what signals that something is high in protein, which signals something that fills you up, which leads people to believe they'll be energized and results in satisfaction. So we put all of that together. Now, how all of this helps the developmental chef, this is an important nuance, right? If you look at the box on the left here, without access to cues, these are pretty much the 4 steps that a developmental chef might go through when they're conducting this types of research. So the chef that we worked on for this project, a chef named Catherine Titus Felix, she said, you know, what differentiates these, surveying the market for what's out there, looking at adjacent categories, applying your creativity to new flavor combinations, making and tasting a lot of great foods, or identifying even what would be like the gold standard from a taste standpoint. Maybe you do those things, but on the left box here, you see what's added, and what's added are these cues. So she can do all of that on the left, but she's also saying, where are the competitors missing cues? So again, think about that roughness. Where were competitors missing some roughness? How do we incorporate roughness into our prototype? Figure out why cues are missing. Were there technical challenges? What do I have to do to overcome those challenges? It's a nice, you know, problem to solve there, right? If you put on your creative problem solving hat. Also, what cue is going to set us apart and be really differentiating? And then, of course, again, going back to creativity, there's ways to incorporate creativity for a chef, but they have a different construct for doing so when the cues are a part of that framework. Now, I can tell you with this product, we have the recipe, okay? This is the outcome from that particular case study. And for all of you who are here with us today, this is in your handout section. If you look on your menu bar for the webinar itself, you should be able to download that handout of this particular recipe. So Catherine's name is right on there. We, of course, want to attribute it to her since it is her creation coming out of this work. But I can also tell you it's worth it. Here's a picture of my college student son, home for Easter break a couple days ago on the left in his I Survived Sharknado t-shirt, by the way, because that's an important show for him. His girlfriend who joined us for the Easter holiday, and of course the bars that they put together. If you take a look in that pan there on the right-hand side, that's the roughness there. There is so much built into this recipe. It was like no other bar we've ever seen. Now, I can tell you that the finished product doesn't necessarily look professional in this regard. Those aren't perfectly rectangular energy bars because I don't have a chef's knife. When Catherine did it, hers looked much more beautiful, but that's what they actually looked like. And I can also tell you at this point, these bars are gone. So they certainly delivered. I actually had the three here, which I saved for myself, the most pristine ones. Those have been my busy, energizing moments. I've had a busy week this week, and took one of these with my cup of coffee in the morning. It was actually better than biscotti, I've got to tell you. So that's sort of the first case study that we're going to talk about. I'm going to bring you into another product category, if you will, and that one is completely different, but it's the soup category. So completely different. It's a totally different, sensorial feel, obviously. And it's also, totally different types of moments. When you eat soup, you're not necessarily looking to fit with a busy, energizing moment, right? So let's take a look here of what we're talking about. Whereas that first sparked the senses that Dave had explained, was for one part of the research. Now we're really looking at co-design and some of that implicit associating, ultimately, that rapid iterative prototyping that we do. It's almost like a little design thinking built in. So if you consider the difference between these two components, co-creation is used to generate ideas, to screen those ideas into a product concept, right? But with co-design, we're translating a product concept into a product design, or prototypes, if you will, with unique specifications. Here's a visual of our methodology for that. When I say a visual, we don't use a typical kind of linear process when we explain this to people. We like to portray this with this like cogs and gears metaphor, because when we think in a non-linear way, in an integrated way, when we're considering product innovation and development, we know that there are more efficiencies here, right? There's insights, there's responsiveness, and there's these iterations that we're talking about, and the whole Agile philosophy of being responsive and quick thinking. Here are some components to our co-design work. Obviously, we have some qualitative focus groups. I'll come back to the fact that this is qualitative in a minute when I'll tell you some of the numbers behind some of the sample sizes, if you will. They are qualitative in nature. All right, so we're priming people with homework. We're exposing them to concepts. We're doing some association. We're still thinking about cues, but in a slightly different way. And of course, making recommendations for other iterations. We're debriefing with our teams, right? We're synthesizing insights, and we're screening what we have. Maybe we're making some modifications. Maybe we're changing some designs with the chefs in the back. Some graphic artists actually did some iterative work not that long ago, where the graphic designer was in the back, kind of real time, making changes to packages that we can show. So nice iterative work here, and of course marketers as well. For this project, we actually did some mini CLTs and some selected exit interviews too, so there was still some other components to that. Let me tell you how the flow was. So we started with focus groups, a little longer than what's traditional. If you look at the left, where we're recruiting 8 for 6, this particular case study around soup, there were 4 groups with females, 2 groups with males. We had a 1-hour-long CLT with 30 participants. So remember, these are qualitative numbers. So even though it's a CLT, which you might typically think of as a quant study with an N of 100, we're doing it on a smaller scale because we have a different goal, right? Our goal is quicker, iterative learnings, rapid sprints. So we can do a CLT with fewer people when we keep our objectives in line with what we're actually heading towards. We had some exit groups with a few of those people in the CLTs. At this point, I can tell you we started with 16 prototypes. We whittled it down. From there, I think the client ended up bringing to market 4 different varieties. So let me tell you how we looked at cues a little differently once we get to this stage. We're not necessarily trying to mine consumers for what cues are associated with a moment, but here we really want to talk about what are the cues that are present that we should kind of approach or leverage, and what are the ones that consumers would avoid, so we should avoid them. If we sort of circle back to what Dave said about the almonds, for some target markets, that salt on the outside of that almond might be a negative avoidance cue. So that's what we're talking about here, is which are the ones that in a soup, we know we want strong flavor. We need a hero vegetable. We know the texture cannot be soft. It needs to be a different type of texture for that. But we also know it can't be unbalanced, right? The flavor has to be balanced and nothing should overpower one of the other elements. So that's how we work with cues to leverage and avoid. We do have some sensory guardrails in um, our co-design work. So, for instance, we know the types of colors that we want to avoid, right? We may not want over here on the right something that's super bright, almost shiny looking from a color standpoint. We also don't want something that's a little earthy and unpleasant, like you see on the left, that might not really look like a soup that people want to eat. But then there's a range of things that can go within those guardrails in the middle, and those are acceptable. Same thing for thickness, right? We want to make sure that from something that's thin to something that's, stew-based, we don't want it to be too brothy with things in it. We don't want it to be too chunky like a stew would be. We want to make sure we stay within those guardrails. So we explore that a little bit. And another thing that we explore is, again, translating those cues into the technical attributes. Let's think back to a chef like Chef Catherine, for instance. If we know that generous is an element we need to incorporate, right? There's something that will ladder up to this pleasant surprise at some point. What does generous mean? Well, we have to ladder down, not just ladder up. We have to go to generous means there's no skimping involved, right? That there's generous amounts of ingredient, that it's filling, and that it's hearty. Those things signal generous in terms of the portion that the consumer consumes, or the participant consumes, or the individual consumes. How do we, if we kind of focus in on the generous amounts of ingredients, there's that amount of ingredients. So we know it needs to have the right amount. Well, that factors into our drain rate weight, for instance, right? That's a technical spec that those R&D folks in the kitchens creating know, all right, we have to experiment with drain rate to get to the right amount of ingredients. And from a visual standpoint, that's where our ingredient ratios and our color ranges come into play. So they know that they have to have that. Also, the visual transparency factors into that, right? What's our visual transparency? So what ingredient ratios do we need to provide to make sure that the visual transparency can ladder up to a generous amount of ingredients? So that's how it all comes together, the different components and the sensory cues, and then again, the translation into the technical attributes that an R&D team can actually work with, and those corporate chefs can actually work with in this type of context. Now, the outcome of this particular project, I can tell you, was fantastic. So literally, it was a month, for the total process of all of that research that we just shared for this case study. And the footprint that came out of it was a look at the flavor intensity. We knew that it needed to be delicious, so we knew how to deliver that delicious flavor intensity. We knew that it needed to say hearty, so we knew what the thickness needed to be. We wanted it to be homemade, so we knew what the complexity needed to be. Generous, we knew what the amount of ingredients were, and we knew that the color needed to be vibrant, not too bright, as we showed you with those guardrails, but it needed to be vibrant. So we had a variety architecture, and we had a package. We put the whole thing together, and it went through commercialization in 7 months, which is an extremely fast time frame for those of you who have been managing innovation pipelines. Anyway, so those are my 2 case studies. I'm going to pass it back to Dave to bring us home. I think that I say officially, Dave, it's all you. I hope. Did I give you those controls? Dave, are you on mute? You might not have your volume back up.
Okay, here we go. I was
there
on
you
mute.
Go.
Sorry. So, just kind of summary here. The hope today we went through some really key sort of methodologies, techniques, so we can actually look at the importance of priming to get people mentally in these moments that are relevant for your innovation initiative, and through sparking the senses or the method of implicit associating, we're able to really go through this process of discovery, becoming inspired through the research, what we learn, taking actions, in this type of design, and then having some way of testing that through this co-design process. Rapid, iterative, it really is an important area of not only just translating, but speeding up the process so you're staying aligned where your product concept, the things that the brand is going to promise through the marketing and the messaging will align with what the product is actually going to signal itself without any words, so people intuitively will know what it's about when they see it, both on the packaging, but also they taste it and feel it as they're having product experiences. Really important, whether you're in the category of developing, a bar for some sort of breakfast or a soup or whatever your product is, we're finding these techniques, food and non-food as well, to be extremely valuable. So in non-food, we're finding that this sort of process is extremely important. Fragrances, are extremely important in signaling various things, and the different types of fragrances can take you the wrong direction if you don't apply these sort of techniques. The colors, the sound, the acoustics, the things that you don't even think about, we're finding that you can build into things, design, packaging, and the contents in ways that really not only accelerate, but make sure you hit the target so the product is designed correctly. So so we are ready for some questions, so at this point. So and I've got some in here. We'll kind of go through. So first one is, will a full set of handouts be available? I only see the recipe and so on. So for you, those of you that have not been involved, this whole webinar is being recorded. So this session will be posted probably later today so that you can just send a click, send the link, and someone else who will have to register. So, but once you're registered, then you can have access to this, not only this webinar, but the one from last month, and it will also register automatically for the one coming up next month. So if you can't make the session, you'll be able to see the recorded version next month as well, and hopefully these three can give you a lot of interest. So that's, I hope that answers the question. Of course, the recipe is a different story. All right, so other questions? Any other questions here? Okay, questions? Is this clear? So is it clear about what we're trying to do in terms of these techniques? Okay, well, I think this is that's all the questions we have at this point. Really excited about this. Let me tell you a little bit about next month, okay? So next month's webinar will be on May the 3rd, same time as 2 p.m. Eastern time. It's going to be about going beyond design and this idea of commercialization sprints. It's going to be co-presented between myself and Greg Stuckey, who is the Chief Research Officer at InsightsNow. What we're going to do is touch on the idea and some of the experiences that we've had over the years with commercialization sprints, where a design, one example, how do you avoid taking a design and through a rationalization process, losing some of the key sort of, because of cost concerns, what some of the key sort of signals through cues that really take a product the wrong direction. That's been something we've seen. So how do you avoid that? We're going to look at a few other things, like such as how do you take a product and make sure that you have it priced correctly versus competitor products? How do you make sure that is going to be scaled up effectively in terms of manufacturing and bringing sort of this sort of commercial iterative? And how do you ensure that the marketing and the messaging is going to hit the mark? Okay, I do have some other questions that are now coming forth, so I will go back to that. So this one is, do you use actual product samples for texture, flavor, aroma, mouthfeel, etc.? And so I'll answer that, but Karen, please jump in as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the early stage, when we're doing sparking the senses, of course, we're starting with sort of stimuli in the fabrics and things like that, which are, of course, not real products. But in the in the sort of last part that Karen was talking about, we're actually doing a mini sort of a CLT. We can actually generate some sort of quantitative information, even though it's still small groups. And we can take actually real commercial products to really ensure and validate the cues that we're in the spark the senses. In the go ahead if you want to add to that.
I was just going to say in the Spark process, we have also used products. So say we're in a particular category, we may have examples of existing products because we're talking about that not from a kind of traditional product testing standpoint where we're talking about do you like the appearance or do you like the taste or texture, but we focus them in on the cues of those product samples. So we use what could be on the market currently, or the very early stages of putting something together can be kind of factored in with that. So we have done it that way at the Spark level as well, and have different kind of taste, flavor samples, if you will, to get at those textural sensorial cues.
Right. Yep. And then, of course, when you get into the implicit associating,
Right.
those can be competitive products. If we've used those sometimes, are certainly going to be prototypes. But in terms of if you're really interested in, depending on what you have a target, a competitive target that you're trying to beat, to really understand the cues and the signals. How can you build into that, as Karen was saying, something that has a competitive advantage? Sometimes the best innovative products, things that compete the most in a category, are things that are very similar in terms of cues, except for a twist, except for something that is different, a different cue, something that's signaling the benefits in a new and different way. Those tend to be the things that are the best sort of innovations that do the best in the market, because people recognize it, but they also then recognize your cue that you've built in this is something that is unique and represents the value that you're trying to bring to the market and you've identified. Okay, so that looks like about it for today. So we really thank you all for participating. We're seeing a lot of people in these webinars, and we're finding that we're happy to gather any sort of input. If you have a question with us privately, you want to contact us, contact Karen or myself if you wish. Our emails are here, listed here on this page. We would welcome your input, or if you know others in our company that you have a relationship with, you want to contact, please feel free to do that. We'd love to talk with you and see if we can address any other questions you have, so that we can move forward. So with that said, until next month, the next Webinars Now session, we're looking forward to doing that. So Karen, anything further you want to say?
Nope, just if you want to email me any pictures of that recipe, if you try it out, I'm a fan.
All right, everyone. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.